Our opening thought comes from Larry Ward and his writing, How to Be Engaged Without Becoming Entangled. He writes, my engagement in society is with groups and individuals who are working towards justice and harmony and well-being all over the planet. But in order for me to not get entangled, I have to first ground myself, come home to what's here now, to who is here now. Am I practicing with my precious life, or am I giving away my precious life? The other thing I do, besides being here now, is to nourish my stillness and equanimity, to engage in the suffering. And then the third thing I am really learning how to do is to let go of it all. Our next reading comes to us from Bruce Epperly and his writing, Mysticism and Social Action, the Spirituality of Howard Thurman. Epperly writes, Howard Thurman was an activist mystic, a universalist who experienced God profoundly in the non-human world of flora, fauna, sky, and sea. He believed that the world is animated by a spirit within which all of us live and move and have our being. This spirit joins all creation and is the deepest reality of every person. Thurman knew the dangers of polarization and racism, having grown up in a culture where he was an outsider in the community of power, where most of the life and death decisions are made which control the common life, who must struggle daily to affirm his identity and find his place in a society whose structures often disregard his voice and value. He knew the power of poverty and racism to destroy the imaginations and dreams of children and their parents. Thurman also knew that God is present in everyone and that transformation can occur among the greatest as well as the least of these. He believed that deep down, everyone could become a mystic. Our next reading is from Thich Nhat Hanh, from an interview he had with Krista Tippett, titled Mindfulness, Suffering, and Engaged Buddhism. Thich Nhat Hanh says, mindfulness is a part of living. When you are mindful, you are fully alive. You are fully present. You can get in touch with the wonders of life that can nourish you and heal you. And you are stronger. You are more solid in order to handle the suffering inside of you and around you. When you are mindful, you can recognize, embrace, and handle the pain, the sorrow in you and around you to bring you relief. And if you continue with concentration and insight, you'll be able to transform the suffering inside and help transform the suffering around you. Mysticism is often seen as an escape from external reality. But perhaps it offers one of the most effective ways to engage the challenges that our world faces today. Perhaps the journey inward helps us ground ourselves for more effective and sustained engagement with the world. Buddhism is sometimes criticized for not being socially engaged. It is seen by some as a retreat within and an attempt to simply escape the suffering of this world. But that is not the whole story of Buddhism. The only way to truly escape suffering is to live a life of engaged compassion in relation with others, including all of life. This is why the late Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh emphasized the importance of engaged Buddhism. He was not adding something new to Buddhism. He was calling the practice of Buddhism back to its roots of compassion found in the life and teachings of its founder. This emphasis on socially engaged Buddhism is seen in the work and teachings of many of Thich Nhat Hanh's students, including Peggy Rowe Ward and Larry Ward, whose perspective on engagement with the world without being entangled with the world we heard in the readings just moments ago. The wisdom of socially engaged Buddhism points to the importance of being mindful and fully present in one's engagement with the world. By intentionally taking the mindful journey within, one is able to understand one's place in this web of relationships we call life, and to see more clearly how we can show compassion for others in the web of all life. By becoming more mindful, we become more present rather than less present to others and less present to their suffering. But we do it without being entangled in the systems that perpetuate suffering. The great African-American Christian mystic Howard Thurman, who lived from 1899 to 1981 and who was dean of the chapel at Howard University and also dean of the chapel at Boston University for many years, and who was also a significant mentor for many civil rights leaders, including being a mentor for Martin Luther King Jr., Thurman was sometimes criticized for being too much of a mystic and for not engaging as much on the front lines of the civil rights movement. Although he was criticized for that, I think you could make a strong argument that very few persons played a more prominent role in the civil rights movement than did Howard Thurman. For it was through his journey within and through his mindfulness of the love of the divine mystery that Thurman was able to fend off what he called the 3 hounds of hell, which he identified as fear, deception, and hate. And by fending off those 3 hounds of hell, he was able to more fully engage in the transformative power of love in this world for the sake of justice and for the dignity of all persons. It was no accident that so many civil rights activists sought out Thurman when their spirits were down and their spiritual tanks were running on empty. They sought him out to help them to reconnect to their inner strength, to reconnect to the power of love in the world in order to re-engage their urgent work for justice in an unjust world full of racism, poverty, and militarism. The mysticism of Howard Thurman was in many ways the spiritual fuel that helped make an effective and sustained nonviolent movement for civil rights a reality. Likewise, the founder of the Catholic Workers' Movement, Dorothy Day, who lived from 1897 to 1980, almost exactly the same years as Howard Thurman lived, is another example of a great social justice advocate and activist grounded in the mindfulness of mysticism. Her movement for workers' rights and social justice is often referred to as a, quote, revolution of the heart, end quote, grounded in spiritual practice and in prayer, as we saw so fully in Dorothy Day's life. Her inward journey provided her with the commitment and the courage to become one of the most important advocates for social justice in the United States in the 20th century. And the power of her legacy continues to inspire the workers' rights movement even to this day. What is the lesson, then, of these mystics for us today? If we look at Thich Nhat Hanh and Peggy and Larry Ward, and if we look at Howard Thurman and Dorothy Day, what is the lesson that we see from these mystics for us today? What wisdom can we gain from them as we work to engage the urgent challenges and injustices of our own time? First, I would suggest this. It's important to keep an eye on our spiritual fuel gauge. Our spiritual fuel gauge. When we are getting close to empty, or maybe even when we're just half full, it is important to find a way to refuel on whatever way works best for us, whether that be connecting with nature, practicing meditation, engaging in prayer, or simply taking time to rest, taking time to take care of our bodies, to take care of our spirits. Refueling our spiritual tank is important for engaging the world. Second, I think it's important for us that we don't view taking time for our inner journey as being a disengagement from the world. That we don't view taking time for our inner journey as being a disengagement from the world, but rather that we see it as preparation for mindful and loving engagement with the world. We cannot be effective advocates for justice for any kind of sustained period of time if we are burned out and if our spirits are broken. Being present to ourselves and loving ourselves helps us to be more fully present and compassionate with others. Third, let's not allow the inward journey to become all-consuming. Let's not allow it to become all-consuming to the point that we lose touch with the suffering of the world. The point of socially engaged mysticism is to experience the creative tension between our inward journey and our outward expressions of compassion and justice-making. The world does not need spiritually burnt-out persons with nothing left to give in the work of justice, but we also don't need isolated, solipsistic hermits and spiritual recluses who have disconnected themselves so much from the world that they are no longer actively engaged in the world's transformation. Perhaps the great lesson of these socially engaged mystics is that we must look within and look mindfully at the world around us in order to sustain our commitment to love and justice in this world, and to be fully present to a world that so desperately is in need of engagement of our lives and our love. May we all be mindful of who we are. May we all be present to those who are around us. May we be fully present in this beloved community that we are working to bring into this world. I was talking recently with one of the persons who studied with Howard Thurman, and he was talking about how important Thurman was to the civil rights movement. And he was engaging that criticism that I mentioned earlier about Thurman not being always present or as present on the front lines of the movement. And the person I was talking to about this mentioned that it was Thurman's being grounded in that inner strength. It was Thurman's being grounded in that sense of knowing who he was and knowing what his dignity was, what his worth was in relation to his being mindful of himself and the world. That was such a strength for so many others. So it was really the case that so many of the civil rights movement leaders would make their way to be physically present with Thurman, to have that opportunity for refueling that would enable them to engage the world so fully and to make such a difference in the world that we saw within the civil rights movement. So perhaps we can learn from that when our tanks are empty, that we go back to that, find that inner strength, to find that place of dignity and worth that we each have as individuals, and that will allow us to help us recognize that in all other persons, but not just in all other persons, in all other life as well. May it be so. Parting thought comes to us as a poem from Howard Thurman. It's much longer than my normal parting thoughts that I use, so stretch out a little bit if you need to. This parting thought is titled, "Life Goes On." Let it also be a prayer during this time of great turbulence and violence and injustice that we see all around the world. During these turbulent times, we must remind ourselves repeatedly that life goes on. This we are apt to forget. The wisdom of life transcends our wisdoms. The purpose of life outlasts our purposes. The process of life cushions our processes. The mass attack of delusion and despair, distilled out of the collapse of hope, has so invaded our thoughts that what we know to be true and valid seems unreal and ephemeral. There seems to be little energy left for aught but futility. This is the great deception. By it, whole peoples have gone down to oblivion, without the will to affirm the great and permanent strength of the clean and the commonplace. Let us not be deceived. It is just as important as ever to attend to the little graces by which the dignity of our lives is maintained and sustained. Birds still sing. The stars continue to cast their gentle gleam over the desolation of the battlefields, and the heart is still inspired by the kind word and the gracious deed. There is no need to fear evil. There is every need to understand what it does, how it operates in the world, what it draws upon to sustain itself. We must not shrink from the knowledge of the evilness of evil. Over and over, we must know that the real target of evil is not destruction of the body, the reduction to rubble of cities. The real target of evil is to corrupt the spirit of humanity and to give our souls the contagion of inner disintegration. When this happens, there is nothing left. The very citadel of humanity is captured and laid waste. Therefore, the evil in the world around us must not be allowed to move from without to within. This would be to be overcome by evil, to drink in the beauty that is within reach, to clothe one's life with simple deeds of kindness, to keep alive a sensitiveness to the movement of the Spirit of God in the quietness of the human heart and in the workings of the human mind. This is, as always, the ultimate answer to the great deception.